In the northern portion of the site, the rocks are folded like this, which is called an anticline. So when you look at this, you have layers of rocks, and in this case we have some blue sheets in here that would represent what the aquifer layer was. And then as you go to the southern part of the site, they actually are folded into what we call a syncline. And how that affects the investigations that we did, that the rocks are also oriented. So you may hear me talk about strike and dip of the geology out there. The strike is, if this is a plane of rocks that you might see on the side of the road, the strike of the rock is in this direction, and the dip of the rock is towards me, so it's an angle. So at the site, we have a series of folds of rocks that trend to the east, and they also dip and plunge to the west. So if you look up there where the aquifer is, we have a series of folds where rainfall happens on the mountain, falls onto the folded rocks, flows down the mountain towards the unnamed tributary, and discharges as springs and also along the stream and in the stream, unnamed tributary. So that is kind of just a picturesque way to explain the geology. Again, it's folded, and if you look at the lines on the map, you can tell which units they are. The other main feature with the units that we show is that the main site area is underlain, and the aquifer that we're yes.
What do you mean by units?
I mean geologic units, ma'am. Thank you. It's a great question. So in the geology, the differing units may be a sandstone is a unit, a limestone, a clay unit. So at the site, the aquifer unit that was the target of the investigation was the Palmerton sandstone, which on here is listed as DP. And the Palmerton sandstone, you can see this fold here. This shows the axis of what I determined, what we determined was the anticline of the site. So the rock where that fold is, the rocks are folded like this and plunging towards the stream. The Palmerton sandstone, as you move down the site, is actually overlain by the Buttermilk Falls clay unit, which forms a confining layer to the aquifer, and I will get into that in another slide here. So in doing the site geology, we looked at generally where the anticlines and the synclines were, looked at where the Palmerton was, and we prepared a aquifer test plan submitted to and approved by the DEP, and based upon that, and based upon the map geology from the United States Geologic Survey, we planned an investigation which included the installation of 17 wells on site. If you look at this, you'll see these little circles, and each one of these circles represents a drilled well, similar to a well that may be drilled for your home with an air rotary drill. We also had set up monitoring points for the testing, and then the wetland areas. The wetlands were mapped, and monitoring points were put into the wetlands to monitor the response of the wetlands to the pumping test we're to conduct. And so we had 13 on-site surface water points, and then we also had 15 off-site points. And I apologize for the scale of this. Again, it's in the report, which is available online. But at some distances over a mile, we had residential wells that we monitored. So here's our site in the middle with all our concentrated monitoring, and with approvals, we were able to put monitoring points, say, farther out here to the west. There was a point to the north and also to the northwest. In all, there was 15 off-site wells that were monitored during the testing that we did. And that is the next thing to talk about. We conducted aquifer pumping tests. So we drilled the wells, determined a yield with them through doing what we call step drawdown tests. So you drill a well, how much does it yield? You put a pump in the well, you pump it at various levels and determine its drawdown and how much water the well can supply. Once that was determined, we did 3 constant rate pumping tests, first using borehole PB2, and that was a 72-hour, 3-day test. We followed that. That was done in a dry period of the year. We actually did it in the fall, where it was ideal testing because precipitation this fall was about 20% below average at the time we did that. And that was a key point to what we wanted to do. We wanted to assess during dry times what the withdrawal would do. So one of the reasons we wanted to get it done in the fall is that it was such a dry fall. The first test then was followed by a test on the second well, production borehole 1, and both of the wells were pumped at about 90 gallons a minute for 3 days each. Thereafter, a test was conducted on the combined boreholes, pumping borehole 1 and 2 at a combined rate of 138 gallons a minute, which equates to about 200,000 gallons a day. And we looked at the effects on the aquifer from those testing, and gathered the data from the off-site wells, the on-site wells, the wetland piezometers, which were all recorded during the test. Most of them were recorded with electronic measurements, so we put a device in the well that would record on 10-minute or hour intervals and do it routinely, so we didn't have to send somebody out to all the wells all during the test. There were some manual measurements done where people may have come out to your well and collected a water level measurement during the test.
Excuse me, would you restate the amount of the joint pumping test? I think you said yes.
So each pumping test was conducted at approximately 90 gallons a minute, and the joint pumping test was conducted at 170 gallons a minute, which is actually above the proposed withdrawal at the site. So the wells, so the pumping rate at 170 gallons a minute is approximately 245,000 gallons a day combined, whereas the proposed withdrawal is 200,000 gallons a day.
Hey, can I say something, Andy? This is bullshit. You're screwing us. When my house is out of water, maybe I'll come see one of you guys, and you guys can give us all some water. I hope you got enough for everyone. I'm sure I'm not gonna be going.
Nestle has a well protection agreement that would be in place to protect water supplies.
Yeah, go fuck yourself. How's that?
Based upon the completion of the pumping tests, we did analysis which is contained in the application, and we determined that the wells are located in the high-yielding Palmerton sandstone on the ridge, and that they are located in a confined aquifer, and the aquifer is confined by the Buttermilk Falls limestone. So this next graph is what we could show is what. It's a nice depiction of what is at the site. Again, this is a publication from a textbook, Fetter, that shows what a confined and unconfined aquifer are, or is. We have cross sections in the report that are very detailed and that go into actually what this is, but for purposes of explaining some of the concepts, I wanted to have a diagram that didn't have too much on it. So, but they are in there, and be happy to speak with you or explain any of the diagrams in the report.
Because we're stupid, right?
This would represent the top of say Chestnut Ridge, where rainfall falls onto the site, infiltrates into the sandstone aquifer, and to a point where the aquifer is saturated. And this level here represents the water table in the unconfined aquifer on the ridge. That water then will move down gradient in the aquifer, and as it moves down gradient, there is a layer, a confining layer, which is the Buttermilk Falls limestone unit, which is weathered to a clay unit, that confines the groundwater. So the groundwater is not able to come up out of here, although the pressure in the groundwater, because of the confining layer, would be at this level. So when you drill this well up here on the hill, when you drill down, you'll hit water at a certain level, and that is the groundwater table. When you drill through a confining layer, as in this well, you would drill down, your well may be dry through the confining layer until you hit the sandstone aquifer, and the water in the aquifer would then rise up to the level of the pressure. And so that's, and you see that many wells may drilled, you may say your driller hit water at 200 feet, but the water level in your well is at 100 feet. So basically that's under a confined condition, the water level comes up in the well. So as we moved down the site, we found very similar conditions until we got down to the lower spring into the unnamed tributary, where the water is discharging and the tributary is gaining as it moves to the Buckwa Creek, which would be into the page. So I mean, really wanted to point out on here that the different wells that we have on the site, and there are wells out there that are very similar to this, and the location of the spring down at the bottom of the site. In map view, what this is, again, this is so this would be in cross-section view going up the hill. Now this is an actual map view that shows what we map on here is the groundwater pressure lines that are represented in that cross-section as it comes down the ridge. And these lines go from a higher elevation than the blue lines on the map to a lower elevation, indicating that groundwater is flowing from east to west and discharging in the valley of the unnamed tributary and also towards Buckwalk Creek. The indications from the studies that we show is that the capture from the borehole and from the pumping test indicates, similar to what we look at in the cross-section, is that when we're pumping the borehole, we're pumping water that's coming down the aquifer from the east and coming to the springs, and we're intercepting that water through the production boreholes. What we also show in here from looking at that is that from the combined pumping tests, we do what's called a drawdown analysis. So we had all those monitoring wells, we measured the water levels in the wells. The water levels in those wells at maximum drawdown during the combined pumping test. So the pumping test was going on for 3 days, and the water levels in affected wells were depressed. This is a representation of that, and basically what you have is either a cone of depression or a drawdown map. It's also called a zone of influence map from the pumping. And what this shows is that with the geology, the pumping is constrained by the geology in that it's coming down the sandstone aquifer, and to the north we have a confining clay unit also, and then it's followed by a shale unit, which is also resistant to groundwater flow, or at least more so than a sandstone aquifer. And in this area we had monitoring wells that showed no drawdown during the pumping tests. There was no drawdown also shown to the off-site wells during the pumping test. To the south and to the ones I showed you on the regional map, there were wells that were out in the community. We did show drawdown of the pressure surface in 2 wells located to the west, and that is the Tanjosh and Kogan wells showed a drawdown to their the potentiometric or the groundwater surface in their wells, and that essentially shows us that the water that is coming down from the ridge is captured to the east and is brought down to the boreholes, and then the pressure in the aquifer is limited to this area, which is confined by the geologic units to the north and the south. So the main part of the analysis, after we looked at this, we then assessed, is this sustainable by looking at that? And how we looked at that, at the same time we did the work, we were also gauging stream data and gauging the spring data and looking at the effect on the streams, the wetlands, and the surrounding wells. We looked at that, and again, we saw 2 wells that had a lowering of the groundwater surface, but these wells received their recharge from the west on the ridge over here, whereas the water that's pumping on the borehole is coming down the ridge from the east. Therefore, the amount of water available to these off-site wells will remain the same because the water that is actually being pumped is coming from the east down the aquifer. However, if there's a problem with those wells, if there's determined to be any problem in the wells, although we don't believe they will be, there is a protection commitment that Nestle is willing to put in, and it has several components, which is, one is monitoring. We'd like to put some monitoring wells in there to monitor during the testing to see if there would be any impacts, and if there were impacts, that they would be mitigated with an agreement with the homeowner. The sustainability of the project was then assessed looking at the gauge data, and we followed very conservative Delaware River Basin Commission methods that look at the withdrawal limit and safe yield based on a 1 in 25 year drought. Again, we did this during a dry period of time, so we measured stream flows and spring flows, but then the analysis was then using published USGS gauge data in correlation with our stream data to say, well, what would be sustainable if we had a drought that recurred on a 25-year interval or a very dry period. And looking at that, we determined that the safe yield for the aquifer was 525,000 gallons per day during a drought time. And then we looked at that would be what would be allowable by the DRBC in a 1 in 25-year drought, 525,000 gallons a day, based upon the recharge area and the stream flows. And then the sum of the proposed uses are 200,000 gallons a day, which is well below that drought threshold of withdrawal allowed by the Delaware River Basin Commission. So, in conclusion, the studies that we were tasked to complete and to give our opinion on to sustainability of it, we basically looked at the withdrawals of the production boreholes 1 and 2 at approximately 200,000 gallons a day, and it included evaluation of sustainability, off-site impacts, the orientation of the aquifer, the recharge to the aquifer using the water cycle. And based upon this, we then use very conservative drought condition requirements of the Delaware River Basin Commission to determine that the withdrawal of 200,000 gallons a day is sustainable. However, as we move forward with the process, we have to get permits from the DEP and the DRBC. And in those permitting processes, there will be permit conditions that will assure that the withdrawal is sustainable during a drought. And we'll even have restrictions for even drier times. A drought more than 1 in 25 years, it would likely have permit conditions onto it. So in conclusion, our studies have shown that the proposed withdrawal is sustainable even in drought conditions.
Question. Why don't we just line up the microphone?
I have a question. My name is Lori Jacobs. Do you need a drink of water?
We don't have any.
So I have a question for you. You said your target for the wells is the Palmerton Sandstone Formation,
Yes.
correct? And it's overlain by the Buttermilk Falls Formation.
Correct.
However, the Palmerton Sandstone Formation does not end there, if I'm correct. It continues over into Schuylkill County. So is this truly a confined aquifer?
Yes, and the location of the site, it is confined on the lower, like the diagram that I showed, it is confined as you move down the site. And on the hill it isn't confined, and there may be other areas in Schuylkill County where it may not be a confined aquifer. As the upper reaches of this site, it isn't confined. It's confined where it's overlain by the Buttermilk Falls, also where the water table would be higher than the aquifer. So.
My map shows that the Palmerton Sandstone Formation is continuous, and as a matter of fact, there were sand quarry operations as close as Little Gap, which I believe is part of the Palmerton Sandstone Formation.
Yeah, the sandstone in general runs along the ridge of the site. It would run in other areas of the township, and I don't know if this is too big of a, but Little Gap would be, so we have Chestnut Ridge, and generally the Palmerton Sandstone runs along the ridge, and it runs all the way down, yes, to Little Gap, and I think there may be a sand quarry there. There's a quarry further up the ridge to the east, correct.
This formation shows it to be continuous, according to the
Yeah, the statement was that the formation is shown to be continuous, and in the way it's mapped, typically the rocks of certain age are continuous in certain areas, yes.
So is this not going to affect a wider area than just the area that you tested?
The way the hydro of the site works is that because of the size of the withdrawals and the drawdowns we've shown on the pumping tests, that the effects of the withdrawals would not range out to miles. They're going to be constrained to the north and the south by the geology. We further looked at that, though. We did an analysis, which is in the report, is we did the pumping tests for 3 days, the combined tests, but then we took the drawdown that was shown in those tests and extended them out for 180 days and assuming that there was no rainfall, which is a very, very conservative assumption. So we based upon that, and what the drawdown would be at the site wasn't significant. So when we have wells that go away from the site that only have, say, 3 feet of drawdown within, say, a couple hundred feet of the site or on the site, that drawdown, therefore, at miles away would be insignificant.
Your name again, please?
My name is Lori Jacobs. My question is this: I have never really been able to get a true understanding of the size, the width, the width and the breadth, as close as you can monitor, of the aquifer.
Okay. The cross section depict. There's an accurate cross section depiction in the application, but the wells that we drilled into the aquifer, into the Palmerston Sandstone.
How many were there?
Oh, we had 17 wells on site. I think a majority of them went into. I'd have to look at the well logs. The majority went into them, but what we found was it was between 180 and I believe 200 feet thick. The Palmerston Sandstone.
Deep? 180, 200 feet?
Thickness. It's thickness. So depending on the elevation where you drill, like if you drill at the top of the hill, you're going to hit the Palmerston Sandstone in the shallow subsurface. But as you move down the hill and you have the confining layer, it'll be at a deeper depth.
So now in our area, does it pretty much align with what you're showing there, like higher up, it's wider? Or, because I'm trying to get an idea of what we actually have here.
In this area, again, the Palmerston Sandstone, and this is a map really of the recharge area of the Palmerston. It's located in this area, and from our on-site, it's about 180 to 200 feet thick. And the publications by the USGS, I think, also listed by about 200 feet thick. I'd have to look up that exact number, but generally it's between 180 and 220 feet thick.
Okay, so if, from using the statistics from your drawdown, has anyone done a study on what impact it would have on the aquifer times that by 25 years?
Yes, so we looked at this again. We looked at it on a sustainable basis. So we actually looked at it on a 25-year drought basis. So how much water would be available during a drought time? As we go back to the water cycle, the pumping is sustainable to the point where we're only able to pump what rainfall comes to us. So in 25 years, it'll still be sustainable. Now, rainfall has increased over the years. In the future, though, if rainfall decreased, we would certainly, the stream flows would show a decrease, and then the production would have to also decrease with that.
Okay, and I know, would you actually be using all 17 wells?
Now, actually, the proposal is for 2 wells, 2 production boreholes.
And how deep would they be?
Those wells were about 200 feet deep also.
That's all?
Yes, that's all.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
There's one thing I'd like to just fill in to add to what Lou said, and that is the Delaware River Basin Commission's requirement of withdrawal limit is based on not allowing long-term lowering of water tables. When he referred to the recharge rate, the withdrawal rate cannot exceed the recharge rate. The point is, year in and year out, not to see a lowering of the water table. Out in places like Texas, they allow what's called groundwater mining, We do not allow groundwater mining in the eastern United States in the Delaware River Basin. That is not allowed. And so the point about what happens 25 years, year in and year out, the idea is not to allow our water tables to drop. That's a regulatory requirement.
Yeah, essentially, what the aquifer has storage in it. So there's after many years, this has water in it, and really what they're allowing us to permit and take from that is how much it rained on it this year and the next year, and we know that by looking at the gauge data, because this water ultimately all discharges to streams. So during the absence of precipitation, what is in the stream is groundwater base flow, which is coming from the aquifer. So the storage of the aquifer is not allowed to be depleted. They permit us on what the rainfall allows us to take.
What's the closest gauge you measured?
The closest gauge is it's two ways to say it from I heard from around, depending where you are, either the Aquashicola or the Aquashicola Creek in Palmerton.
That's affected by the flow of the Aquashicola.
The Buckwa Creek at the
Gauge was impacted by the Aquashicola.
was our testing impacting the gauge of the Aquashicola.
No. The gauge you're measuring from is impacted by the Aquashicola.
The gauge that we actually had gauges on site in the Buckwa Creek when we did the test, and we correlated those gauges and then our flow gauges to the gauges at the Aquashicola Creek down in Palmerton. And so during that the time period that we did it, the Aquashicola is roughly 80 square mile basin. The Buckwa Creek is basically a 20 square mile basin, so it's about the quarter of the size. And we did measurements on the streams that indicated a very good ratio between the two. So when we looked at our withdrawal, we looked at what the withdrawal would be on the Buckwa Creek based upon the gauge at Aquashicola and on our on-site measurements. So we wouldn't expect to see an effect on the Aquashicola gauge, and also on the Buckwa Creek, the withdrawal was immaterial really in volume to what's flowing by in the Buckwa Creek.
Did you look at any of the data from the County Conservation District?
The County Conservation District, we typically get soil data from. I hadn't looked at any.
Testing's done annually.
Oh, the Monroe County did annual stream testing. Yes, we did look at that data for the Monroe County. It was mainly water quality sampling data they had. They had some. Pardon me?
And stream flow.
They had very sparse stream flow data in there. And what they had the one year that we looked at it, it was very similar to the flows that we had seen on our site, which is, I think at the time, the average flow in the Buckwa Creek at the time of the sampling was about 12.5 million gallons a day. So we did look at that. The water quality data in that indicated that the stream was, from what I can tell, was conforming use as a cold water fishery. So that's why they collected the data to assess the health of the stream, whereas the withdrawal here is not going to really impact the stream or the streams, or should not impact the stream's water quality.
I have a question. My name is Marissa Strohline. Is this the first time your organization has worked with Nestle?
No, it's not.
Okay, how many other water extraction plants have you reviewed for them?
We have worked with Nestle. I think some of the first work I've done with Nestle is probably in 1999 when I first started looking at sites for them.
Okay, have you rejected a single application?
Yes, certainly a lot of applications don't even make it to the application process because we come in, we do our sustainability analysis, and I provide recommendations to my client to say this site is or isn't sustainable. So a lot of the sites we've looked at for Nestle didn't go to permitting because of sustainability issues. Yes.
All of these questions and studies were also done in Mecosta County, Michigan, where Nestle actually did end up damaging their watershed. They were sued in court and they lost. After they were sued in court, instead of backing down or agreeing to drill for less water or working with the community, they continued to try to sue the community, do everything they could to continue drawing the same amount of water. So my question is, what are your reassurances that your studies aren't just as faulty as theirs?
I can't speak. I cannot speak for the Michigan studies, but I know in Pennsylvania and the water permitting climate in Pennsylvania with the multi-regulatory commissions and the the push and the need for the water to be sustainable to get the permits
Why
that.
are some of the people that were affected in the communities that you've already drilled here saying their piece about this?
I don't know of any of water supplies that we have permitted. I can't think of any affected, any parties that were.
Actually, Nestle likes to claim that they've never damaged a neighboring well. The truth is that there are plenty of people who have made various complaints about damage to their wells. Nestle has just never decided to compensate any of those people.
Again, I can't speak for Nestle. I have worked for them and worked for other clients. They have been, in my mind, exemplary, gone above and beyond to assure that there were no impacts. At this site, there's a great example for that, in that the withdrawal on the site is located in an aquifer that here's the drawdown from that aquifer. Across from that aquifer is a clay unit. From that clay unit is the shale unit, and from that shale unit is another hydraulic divide that is the Buckwall Creek. So as a hydrogeologist, I would expect no impact to the shales or the stream. And in discussing with Nestle, they said to me, "How can you assure us that we're not going to have any effect on the well, on the residents?" And the best way to do that would be to drill wells here. So Nestle went the extra mile to drill the wells to gather the data to give assurance that there wouldn't be impacts.
Are you aware that the site they're going to be drilling on was used as a dump for a long time, and that there are actually gas tankers down there that have been there for decades? How do you think that will impact the quality of the water they will be drilling for?
Nestle is very concerned about the quality of the water, and it would impact their business if the water quality wasn't up to their standards.
So drilling
As
from the dump, that's not a concern of theirs?
It is a concern, and as part of our studies, we did phase 1 environmental assessment. We looked at environmental records, we looked at records of DEP, and we found no indication of dumping at the site. There used to be ponds at the bottom, and the ponds are still there. They would fill them with silt. They would bring the silt and put it up top.
There are people in this room that learned how to shoot by shooting rats at that dump. Everyone in this community knows that that dump existed. And even though some stereotypes certainly aren't true, as to borrow a phrase from my friend, this is not too bad for a bunch of dumb Dutchmen showing up and asking these questions. But I have to tell you, some stereotypes are true. I'm telling you right now, if there was a dump in this area, I can't even imagine what was in it. So you were looking at papers that would not even have that information on it. That's meaningless that you looked at there. No one was reporting on that in a little backwater town that they were using a sand pit as a dump. Are you telling me that none of you dug down there, cared to see what was in there before you start drilling there for water to feed to people?
We drilled numerous wells. We did environmental studies on the site. We didn't find any indications of the dump. Nestle is very concerned with the water quality. If you know where that dump is, I'm sure that you'd be happy to show Eric where it is. They are very concerned with their water quality, and the water quality testing showed excellent quality.
We have the next question, please.
I'd also like to point out that Eric, that gentleman up there who works for Nestle, sits on the DRBC, which is one of the regulatory committees that you mentioned.
I believe that's incorrect, ma'am. He's not a member of the Delaware River Basin.
He's in an advisory position, my mistake, and actually he's been shown the dump, I believe. Has he been shown the dump?
Yes.
Oh, he has been shown the dump. So, that's been taken care of.
I respectfully disagree with that opinion.
With the opinion that he has been shown the dump, or the opinion that he is the...
That he is, you can speak to Eric directly, however.
And what about the well that they lost over there? They probably hit a Buick or something.
So, my last question, I'm sure greatly to your relief, are you legally liable if this damages our watershed? Because these were your studies that assured Nestle that we would be safe.
We take my license as a geologist very seriously. It's my livelihood. When I'm tasked to evaluate the sustainability, we take it very seriously. In this event, we did multiple studies, drilled numerous wells to evaluate that.
I think she was saying safety.
You didn't answer the question.
Safety, not sustainability.
Hi, my name is Desiree Jakel. I have some questions about things you did not address. It's common knowledge that when you drill in sandstone or limestone, as opposed to shale, that especially limestone, that is very, the dirt gets very loose. It's very porous. The dirt gets very loose. That's an absolute geological fact. Okay? Not so much in shale as in limestone and sandstone, especially limestone. Now, I know for a fact, I mean, I had geology in college and I was referring back, I know it's 40 years ago, but I was referring back to my books. And they were saying that it's very easy for limestone to get into the water, and we turn our faucet on, there will be dirt in the water, especially in limestone. I think that's a very feasible thing that's going to happen here, no doubt about it.
The aquifer that they're targeting is a sandstone aquifer that's overlain by what used to be a limestone aquifer that has weathered to clay. So it's not a classic limestone. And in this area, in other areas, maybe you look at your book, there was concerns in limestone with karst topography or sinkholes, and that is not the case at this site.
So clay cannot get loose and bring dirt into our water? Clay?
In the context of how the wells are constructed, the clay will be cased off and the wells will be into the Palmerton sandstone. And if the dirt or clay were to come out of the aquifer, it would be into Nestle's trucks and not out into the environment.
Okay. All right, another question I have is during the test, I've got the Right to Know Act. And in the Right to Know Act, even at Sharon Solt in the Right to Know Act actually calls Bill Getty up and says, you know what, the hot water is starting to smell like sulfur here during the test. And several other places said they had dirt in their water. One man said that his water was still yellow several weeks after the test. So you know that does happen. That does disturb the dirt and the ground when you extract water. That's a fact, and it happened during the test. I have it in the Right to Know Act paperwork.
I'm sure Mr. Andrews is happy to look at your house and your well for that. We certainly would also.
Well, not mine.
I'm
lucky. I live where there's shale. I'm one of the lucky ones.
The aquifer and the monitoring network is set up is that during the testing, this is where the impact was shown in the wells. There was no drawdown or impacts to wells that were off-site. It was a very dry period, and during the time.
Take less showers.
Now my next question is, my lab professor at Kutztown was doing his dissertation on earthquakes in Pennsylvania. So if there is an earthquake, and where I live, shale, because I was always told, oh, you have a perceived impact where you live, it's shale. Nothing's going to happen to you. There's no way that your water can get drawn over past the buckway. That's not true. If there would be an earthquake and cracks would come into the shale from earthquakes, which Pennsylvania does have, how do you know that the water, as a matter of fact, Mr. Getty said to me, your well can go dry in 2 hours where you live, if under certain conditions. He didn't say what they were, but I'm referring back to my professor's dissertation in earthquakes in Pennsylvania, that cracks could come into the shale. What about that?
I'd say that the likelihood for impacts to the wells from an earthquake would be highly unlikely. I also think that
if there was
an impact,
his dissertation on earthquakes in Pennsylvania.
Because earthquakes occur in Pennsylvania, and
so that causes cracks in shale.
Earthquakes can cause damage to structures, can cause also damage to geologic formations, and that is something that why during this process there would be monitoring to go on. If there was an earthquake that would affect the water supply or that supply, there would certainly be testing to see if that earthquake or the withdrawal from the site as a result of that earthquake would affect an off-site supply.
So I am right that cracks could occur and it could be drawn over through the suction over to the other side from where the shale is in tier 2.
No, there's a couple
tier
of
3.
There's several protective factors from the site to the north and across the stream. One, it would be more likely if there were cracks caused that you would drain water from the stream. The stream is a hydraulic divide. There's millions of gallons of water flowing down the stream that would fill into the cracks. South of that, you have the shale, you have the clay unit, and then you have the aquifer. So very highly unlikely for something like that.
But I know that shale, we're more protected from getting dirt or getting where we are having our wells go dry. But if we do have a problem with our shale, it's real expensive to drill through that, and you got to really pound and pound. So anybody who has shale is going to have a real expensive job when they have to have a well drilled. Yes or no?
I would think that if an earthquake affected your well, it would not be the result of Nestle.
I'm not talking about an earthquake now. I'm saying that if someone who has shale has got to have a well drilled, it's going to be real expensive because you gotta pound through that shale like there's no tomorrow.
I don't know why drilling a well before or after an earthquake would be more
I'm
expensive.
not talking about after earthquake, I'm on to another subject. I'm on to the subject that if somebody who's in another tier 2 or 3 where there's shale, and their well does go dry, it's a bigger fortune to get a well drilled than if you have sandstone, right?
Our studies show that those shales will not be affected by the withdrawal at the site.
That's what I
We were
keep
across a
hearing, but I
shale
don't
unit.
believe it.
We have a stream unit, and we have the shale, and we had monitoring points during the testing. There will be ongoing monitoring during the permitting and also during the withdrawals of
That's
the
not what I
site to
asked you.
assure.
I said if it does happen, and it can happen.
If it does happen, Nestle has, and which is, I believe, highly unlikely given the hydrologic barriers between the
That's
site
not what I
and
asked
the
you. I
north.
asked you if it's very expensive to drill a well in shale. That's what I asked you. And it's very difficult to pound through shale as opposed to sandstone, right? And limestone. Yes or no?
It really depends upon your environment. Many wells are drilled in shale. Homeowner wells are drilled in shale. They supply.
Well, I spoke to many people who are in that business, and they told me you really got to pound to get through shale. You really got to pound.
There will be no off-site impacts into the shale to the north. And drilling your well, whether it's not going to be affected by the Nestle withdrawal, it's going to be affected by the local conditions.
Well, that's ridiculous. One last question. The Marcellus gases. I was told by a very intelligent civil engineer that the biggest problem we have here after continuous extraction of water is going to be that the Marcellus gases can be drawn into our aquifer, and forever we will never be able to drink our water. And unlike granite aquifers, which are not connected, because we do not have granite here, we have shale and sedimentary rock and so forth, that all the aquifers are interconnected, unlike granite aquifers. Therefore, all of our aquifers could eventually be affected by any of the extractions that are going on, especially over a long-term period of extractions.
I disagree with the premise, and I respectfully disagree with
I
your
was told by
position.
several engineers, environmental engineers, that Marcellus gases can end up in our aquifer. And isn't this true? Well, if that does happen, you can never drink the water. All our horses will never be able to drink the water. All our cows will never be able to drink the water. And we will never be able to drink the water, but that's not as bad for us as cows and horses, who need enormous amounts of water every day. And I don't know how you expect to take care of all the animals around here if something happens. People have horses, donkeys, llamas. How are you going to bring water in to a farm where there is no water because it's been sucked out for reasons you're denying?
Again, I disagree with your premise. The water regulations are such that we cannot affect off-site users. There's a permit condition in the current permit that says if we affect an off-site user, if Nestle affects it, they have to replace their well.
So you're going to bring in a lot of water for all my donkeys and all my llamas. You're going to bring in big things for my donkeys and people that have tons of horses here. You're going to really take care of the animals when something happens.
If something happened, absolutely, we have a permit condition in the regulatory requirement that the regulatory agency would pull their permit if they impacted wells and did not address it.
That doesn't help.
That wasn't the question.
Next question, we have the next question. We have the next question, please.
Would you? Next question. Did you get your water?
My name is Kevin Lenhart. My question is, when you did this testing, where was the water pumped to?
Yes, so the water extraction on the site, when we did the pumping tests, and again, it's hard to see, but when you come down, the production boreholes are here, the water went in a pipeline that came down, and here's Rick Gower's building. A little bit further to the west of that, it was discharged to the stream at this location.
So it was pumped out and put directly back into the buckwater?
It was pumped, yes, from up gradient and pumped to a down gradient location in the buckwater, yes.
So no hydraulic pressure was changed whatsoever? Took it out and put it right back?
The buckwater, the flow in the buckwater is away from the site, and the discharge location was looked at by the DEP for that very purpose. We look at that when we do a pump test. We don't want to do what's called recycling of the water. We don't want to pump the well and discharge the water right next to the well, because you could have that effect that you're talking about. So in this case...
But you took the water out and you put it right back?
No, we did not. We took the water out of the groundwater.
Did you haul it away?
And we put it into the stream, which is a surface water, and that stream was located across 2 hydraulic divides and down gradient of the site.
Oh, I'm not a zoologist or geologist, but my well is about 150 feet from the buckwater, And I can tell you firsthand, when the stream goes up, the head in my well goes up. When it goes down, my head in the well goes down.
That's
So
correct.
basically, you're taking it out and putting it right back during your testing. You're not changing any hydraulic pressure.
In the I showed you the map of the drawdown. We changed the hydraulic pressure in the sands.
Simply,
I am trying to answer the question, sir. Am I changing the hydraulic pressure where?
between the groundwater and the buck well.
In this instance, no. The groundwater, the drawdown clearly showed that there was no impact to the wells to the north or adjacent to the buck well through the pumping of it. The pressure head was affected in the Palmerton sandstone, but not into the shale to the north or into the Buckwall Creek.
Right, but you were only pumping water out and putting it right back into the ground without changing hydraulic pressure. As you hauled it away, all that water you pumped out, you may have seen different results.
I disagree. We professionally, we took this discharge location was specifically chosen to not impact the pumping of the test. So the water that was discharged was not recirculated back into the aquifer. It was put into the surface water and flowed into the Buckwall Creek.
Can you explain to everybody why when the buckwall rises, that the head of my well rises?
If your well
goes down, the head of my well goes down. I've been monitoring that for about 15 years before you were supposedly even thought of. So I know this for a fact.
Certainly, the stream, if your well is next to the stream and it's in the shale where the Buckwall Creek is located, then the well's water levels are affected by the stream water levels.
Okay. So what about all the people that live right here next to the Buckwall?
Their stream, if their well is also in the shale next to the Buckwall, their well would also be affected by the water levels in the Buckwall.
Okay. Now, my second question would be, you talked about during drought times, and that would not affect your 200,000 gallon a day withdrawal. Is that right?
No, that is not correct. There's several layers of permitting. One, we did the testing during drought times.
No, it wasn't actually a drought.
It was a very dry fall. We were about 20%.
It was not a drought.
It wasn't a declared drought. It was at the time of testing. We were about 20% low on our rainfall, and it was a dry fall.
20% is not a drought.
That's not a drought.
Okay, so what we did then in the testing was we simulated a drought by looking at drawdown at 180 days without rainfall. When it goes to the permitting process, the further looks at that, they will look at pass-by requirements onto the stream. So in other words, does our withdrawal affect the surface water, and to what extent does that affect it? So if there is a significant drought, we have to maintain a certain amount of pass-by to the streams to protect the aquatic organisms. So that's the next level. The third level is if there is a drought emergency declared, in the permit there will be a drought mitigation plan, and there is a high potential that they would have to stop pumping the water if it's a severe drought.
Okay, because about 7 out of the last 20 years we've been in drought season where they've highly recommended that we not wash our cars and water yards, which is, say, 20,000 people at about 10 gallons a day would be about your 200,000 gallons. And
There would likely be
instructed us not to, wash your car, but you're saying that won't affect you.
No, I said the opposite. I said it would affect. There's several layers of permitting requirements in there that go into effect during droughts. One is we did it during a dry time. We then looked at it at 180 days with no precipitation. It was very unrealistic.
Simulated drought at 20%. But
no, the drought, it was 20% below rainfall when we did the testing.
Right.
And then after the testing, we looked at it and said, what would our drawdown be in these wells if we had no rain for 180 days? And we looked at that. So we have that drought level then that we looked at the sustainability. Above that, when we go through permitting, we also look at the pass-by, like the stream flows. What are the stream flows during that? And that'll be a requirement in the permitting to maintain certain levels of the stream flows. And then above that, there'll be a drought mitigation plan. If there's a severe drought, like you have your water curtailed, there may be curtailment that the Delaware River Basin Commission may in place also on the permitting.
A different meaning out of California, right?
has Nestle ever dried up a town? Has that ever been happening? sorry, I didn't say that. How does it ever happen?
I would have to defer to Eric, but in my experience, I wouldn't think that based upon the practices that Eric does and
He's right there, ask him.
Short answer, no.
What's the long
About
answer?
that?
Positive.
Does anybody here disagree?
Why is it public, on internet?
I listened very closely to your presentation and I thank you for it. I listened with interest. You referred to the north and the south. Tell the people that you monitored 2 wells directly to the west. You impacted one around 10.5 feet and the other one about 9.5 feet. I could give you the names, but that wouldn't be fair to them. And in your report, you put it very nicely that only 2 wells were impacted. But sir, there are 8 more wells there right adjacent to that you never monitored. So the 2 you did monitor were impacted by your own report. I have the copies here. I'll be glad to share them with you or anyone else who wants to see them. The second thing I listened with great interest, you keep referring to the water coming down from the top of the mountain. Am I correct there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I don't own any water. I want to make that perfectly clear. But I own 140 acres on top of that mountain where that water by Eric and other people's admission comes from. The only thing I can think of what's really happening is you're capturing that water as it comes down the mountain. It's not your water. It's not my water. I ask the question, whose water is it? You capture it. You sell it at a high profit for something that isn't yours. You're taking it, and it's really not yours. In my upbringing, that used to be called stealing.
Regarding the first point, I mentioned in my presentation about the impacts to the wells, and certainly Nestle would prefer to monitor more wells in that area. And going forward with the permitting, they would like to put monitoring points there to assure that the impacts to those wells.
We wouldn't trust them. I wouldn't trust them. I wouldn't trust your organization either, sir.
I have a professional license, sir. I think
You monitored 2 of my springs at one well.
You're paid by Nestle.
Any others. But address that last comment I made too.
I guess that's more of a legal question, I would think. I would defer to Mr. Weston if I may.
First, I strongly disagree with your characterization, sir. Under Pennsylvania's common law, anybody who owns property has a right to use water on the property. Nestle, in this case, through its lease, has the right to use water on the property. That's not stealing, that's using the legal right. And let me finish. One of the responsibilities of any user, whether it's a homeowner or it's Nestle or anybody else, is at the same time to make sure that they don't adversely affect other people. You have to make reasonable use of the water, and that's why we set up the kind of river basin commissions and agencies that we now have. Historically, the courts had to deal with this after the fact. That was not a good arrangement. You didn't want to wait until a drought and have a problem and have the courts then determine it. So what we did is we set up administrative agencies in a permitting process to require the kind of testing that has now been done, and to prove before you get a permit that you're unlikely to have an effect. And then beyond that, we set up laws under the Delaware River Basin and at DEP that if an effect occurred, that the person who caused the effect had to take care of it. Now that was the change in law from what our common law was. And it happens to be, I think, a step forward from what our common law was.
For who?
Well, sir, I'll explain for who, for frankly all of you. Back in the 1950s, there was a Supreme Court case called New Jersey, or Digay and Kento versus New Jersey Zinc Company. Under the old law of Pennsylvania, New Jersey Zinc Company was allowed to dry up all of Saucon Valley. We reversed that law in Pennsylvania, and the Delaware River Basin Commission enforces that reversal of law.
Explain your first in concept and the shared use.
Okay, you're going back to the last
I'm back
meeting.
to your previous meeting.
Okay. Section 3.3 of the Delaware River Basin Compact declares that no permit, no allocation is a prior appropriation of water. Prior appropriation is a term in water law which is called first in time, first in right. Out in California or Texas and other places that follow prior appropriation, if you got onto the land and you wanted to take a certain amount of water, you got it, and nobody else coming later could have water. And if it got dry, the first guy got all the water they wanted before anybody else, any of their neighbors got any water. That was prior appropriation. The Delaware River Basin does not follow that. They follow the principle of reasonable use, which means
Mr. Kovacs told me exactly different from what you're telling me.
well, please look at section 3.3 of the Delaware River Basin Compact. It was built into the law. I'm going to give this back to you.
I think we need to move on, because there's other presenters here, and once we get through that, then we'll take your other questions.
I have an important question on the USGS data. That they have.
We'll take them at the end. We need to move on. Next presenter.
I would like to hear his question.
Let the man speak. We're here for questions.
He stood there for 20 minutes.
Let's hear his question. We had to listen to you for a half hour. Let's listen to his
True that.
I'd like to start with a general question.
His question.
I'd like to start with a general question so we can see where we're going.
Unless you want to not hear the traffic impact.
Well, first of all, these nice gentlemen...
And does this pertain to the hydrogeological
everything
information?
does, basically. I'm Dr. Baker. I live in the township here. I'm a physician. I've dealt with scientific papers before. Some of them are not worth their salt. Some are. That being said, let me ask you this. You gentlemen from Nestle, who can speak to Nestle's policies?
That's not relevant this time. I apologize.
Well,
I apologize. It's not relevant this time.
Let me just ask this then.
No, you.
Okay, I'll come back.
Thank you very much. And thank you,
I
too.
have a specific numerical question about water, and very quick. It'll take 30 seconds. And that is, there was a number rattled off at the beginning of the meeting of 245,000 gallons, max. I'd like to know how that relates to the 525,000 gallons per day sustainable, that they can take over 500,000 because the residents would be much less than 25,000, and how it relates to the 200,000 gallons average per day that we got last meeting.
Certainly. The proposed project is for 200,000 gallons a day average withdrawal over a monthly period. That is what we're proposing to permit with the DRBC. The pumping tests were conducted at a combined rate of 170 gallons a minute, which is 245,000 gallons a day. And that would be what we petitioned DEP for, the maximum pumping rate that would be in the permit for that. You also mentioned the 525,000 gallons a day. The 525,000 gallons a day was a watershed average based upon a 1 in 25 year drought of what water would be available in the basin. And withdrawals above that level would not be allowed to be permitted by the Delaware River Basin Commission because it would be above the 1 in 25 year drought sustainability. So our permitted volume is 200,000. What we're looking for is 200,000 gallons a day on a monthly average, which is well below the 525,000 gallons.
My question then, my really question is it going to be the case that you'll never be able to take more than 245,000 gallons in a given day? Or is that not what
With the current, with the current for the pumping from the boreholes to the silos, that would be the maximum and instantaneous withdrawal per minute. Be 170 gallons a minute, and average that through a day, 1,440 minutes would be 245 gallons a day pumped. Correct.
Never more.
So you'll never be able to get over 245,000 towards the 500,000 that's sustainable?
Oh, you guys are keeping.
With the
Correct.
current
Because
conditions.
as Mr. Weston, there's other uses that may be in the basin, there's water that must be left for other potential uses.
I think I got it, thank you.
That's so nice of you.
Excuse me. I've had my hand up, and I've been waiting patiently. I haven't jumped in front of anybody. He made a statement about the water flow that had no effect on the flow of the Buckla, that on the days that you pumped.
It had minimal effect. We were pumping during the test. I'd have to look in the report. I think the flows in the Buckwa were, believed to 8 to 12 million gallons a day, and our pumping decreased the flow at the culvert flume into the Buckwa. I believe about 63 gallons a minute.
Do you have the data from the gauge station in Aquashickle?
The Aquashickle, yes, we use that gauge data then to assess the base flow of the site, yes.
And you could see as the days that you pumped, it wasn't a drought, but there was less water. It was going down like this, and you could see when you drew down, it dropped down like that. And then it recovered, and then it went down, then you drew down again, and it dropped all the way down like that. And then it went back up, recovered again. Every time you drew down, you could see it.
We saw that effect in the wells, yes.
And you saw it down, but you said you didn't see any effect at the site.
We didn't see effects to the flow.
Palmerton?
No, there was no effect shown in Palmerton.
The Aquashickle?
At the Aquashickle gauge, correct.
In Palmerton. That's
Correct.
Palmerton. But you saw it down there.
No, we did not see it in the effects of the gauge. The water.
I saw the gate. I saw it.
Well, we'd have to correlate that to our test. The flow in the stream was millions of gallons a day, and we decreased the flow at the site 62 gallons a minute, I believe. I have to look at the report, which is about 100,000 gallons a day, which would not be detectable at the gauge at Aquashickle.
Well, the Buffalo flows into the Aquashickle.
Correct.
So you're saying we had a drought?
We were saying it was a dry period. We had 20% less rainfall
What
at the
made
time.
it recover like that quick?
I would have to, with you, I'd look at the gauge at the Aquashickle. The flow at that
The
point,
recovery came from you pumping it back into the Buffalo.
the flow at the site was about 12 million gallons a day in the Buckwa Creek. The Aquashickle watershed is about 4 times bigger. So the flow there would be about 48 million gallons a day during the testing. A difference in 63 gallons a minute would not be seen several miles downstream in the Aquashickle gauge.
And what caused that?
You'd have to show me the gauge, and we'd have to look at that, and I could.
Well, you said that's what you used, the USGS data from the gauge station.
We used the long-term data from the gauge station to determine what the base flows were in the basin and how much groundwater discharge was coming out.
Real quick.
Sir, could I have your name?
Jerry Madden.
One thing I can say is I looked at that same data and had lots of questions, but we're fortunate as a township that Hanover Engineering is here today in regards to the environmental impact statement, and we also have our own hydrogeologist that's reviewing it in detail. And please, we welcome, encourage anybody here who, since we're not hydrogeologists and don't have that background, that in-depth background, to make a comment. Any specific questions you have, please email, and if you don't have email, call Ann, and she'll take that down and get it to, in this case, the Planning Commission, and we'll get it to the Zoning Hearing Board and or the Board of Supervisors. So I encourage you to do that.
Thank you.
Yep.
I just have a real quick recharge question, please. I think it's imperative. My name's Patrice Genta, and the question's directed at the gentleman who just explained all the topo max.
I would ask you to send that to Ann, and I'll make sure she'll give it to me personally, and I will give you an answer for that.
Why? Why can't I ask a question?
Because we're trying to get the rest of the
This is a public forum. This is why we're all here. We're all giving up our time. I just want to know why the Buckwa Creek, if you're saying that the recharge rate is adequate that the creek will never be dried up, that the recharge rate, that downflow, all of that pressure was going to maintain it. We know for a fact the Buckwall went bone dry in 1972. 1972. We have eyewitnesses. There were maybe 1/10 of the amount of people in Kunkletown that are here today. There wasn't development like there is today, yet the stream went dry. How could that happen according to every one of your projections that claim that the recharge would never allow that to happen? I think that's important.
If the Buckwall went dry in 1972, how comes the stream at my house did not go dry? That would have had to, it runs into the Buckwall, is considerably smaller. I lived there. That little princess has never gone dry. Patrice, I don't want an argument out of you. I'm just telling you.
Your stream has a different headwater than the Buckwall. Your stream, the princess is fed from upstream. It's not fed from the Buckwall. The Buckwall is fed.
I know that. I know where every tributary is for the Little Princess. Okay. I'm trying to get its name back for it, and I'm not getting anywhere. However, you think then if the Buckwall went dry, I'm just using a bucket of water.
No, because they don't.
How could it keep on running? Wouldn't it have gone dry?
Because your headwaters come from a different source than the Buckwall. The Buckwall does not feed the princess until later on.
Well, I'm going to have to talk to somebody because I can't figure that one out. I thought when one got dry, it took the other one along with it.
Well, it's true if in fact it worked prior to where they co-joined, but that's not in fact where they do. Okay, so.
I'd like to call Earl Armitage to explain the traffic study.
Thank you. Okay, as Tim mentioned, my name is Earl Armitage. I work for Pannoni. We completed the traffic impact study for the site. And I'm going to start out with, in order to determine the scope of our traffic impact study, we met with both PennDOT and the township, along with the township's traffic engineer, Hanover, to determine exactly what we were going to study. We determined what intersections we were going to study, what roadways, what intersections we needed to look at traffic volumes and operations, and also where we need to look at sight distance. The first part of our study included a truck route study, and I know this map is a little hard to see, but I have a couple other slides that zoom in a little bit further. In order to determine the truck route that would be the best route from this site to Nestle's bottling facility in Brightonsville, we drove a variety of different routes. We primarily looked at all state routes that are owned by PennDOT in order to avoid local township roads. So the two routes that I show here, the one in red is the primary truck route, the one in yellow is a secondary truck route. All of them are on state-owned roadways. They own the roads, they maintain the roads. If I zoom in real close, you can kind of see the site is right here. This is Kunkletown Road. This is Chestnut Ridge Drive. The primary truck route would involve the trucks leaving the site, making a right turn out of the unnamed township road onto Chestnut Ridge Drive. They would then proceed to the stop sign at Kunkletown Road. They would make a left. They would travel west until they get to the intersection of Silver Spring Boulevard, where they would make a right turn. They would head up Silver Spring Boulevard, north, until they get all the way up here, and they would head west over to the turnpike to
209, right?
Correct.
That's right.
Correct. That is the route they would take. The secondary route, and I'll get into sight distance, the secondary route, because right now there is a bridge up here that has a posted weight restriction, so the trucks could not travel over that. That bridge is scheduled to be replaced by PennDOT as part of their P3 initiative, the Rapid Bridge Replacement Project, and that's on the schedule for 2017. They're going to go out to get the bids to replace that bridge and then remove that restriction.
Not wide enough. How are you gonna make a left there?
I'll be able to answer all your questions as I go through. Yes. After the bridge is replaced, this will be the primary route. The secondary route, the vehicles would turn left onto Kunkletown Road, and they would continue west all the way over to Palmerton, and they would head south on 248 at that location.
Right. Wow. What about kids with school buses? Wow.
The next part of our study was levels of service. We were asked to look at how does this development impact the existing conditions. So in order to do that, we had to collect traffic counts. So we went out to the intersections, we counted every car that turned right, left, or went straight through the intersections. We also put counters out on the roadway to count every car that went by 24 hours a day for a 7-day period. And that's also in the report as well. So we gathered all the existing data. The way that we measure levels of service is very similar to grades you would get, A through F. Obviously, A is better than an F. A means that the intersection or the roadway functions well with very little delay. F means there's a lot of congestion and the average vehicle is sitting at the stop sign, in this case, for over 50 seconds. We took the existing conditions to figure out where we were as a baseline. We added the truck traffic, and then we would see how the analysis comes out. The existing conditions is shown here on the left in this column for existing AM peak hour. This is a PM peak hour, so on a weekday, the commuter peak times, and then also on a Saturday. We were asked by the township and PennDOT to look at a Saturday. The no build for 2017 is basically taking the existing volumes we have in 2015. We just grow those based on approved rates that PennDOT provides, assuming general growth in the area with other development. And then we add our traffic on top of that. And this is for all traffic studies for Nestle or any studies that are done for traffic. And then this column on the right, the third column in each of these, is the build condition. And as you can see on this chart, this is for the intersections of Chestnut Ridge and Kunkletown Road, and Chestnut Ridge and the unnamed Township Road, where the site traffic is going to come out. Everything on these charts is showing a levels of service A, with the exception over here we have 1B. And that's just because, as you can see on the previous table here, when you go over 10 seconds, it goes from an A to a B. So it's very close to a B. Adding the small amount of truck traffic made it go over to a B. So this was for 2 trucks an hour, also 2 trucks an hour going to the site, but the trucks have to go to the site and leave the site. So it's 4 trips here. At the last meeting, there was a lot of discussion on maximum trucks. What are the maximum trucks? Are there days that you're going to be running hundreds and hundreds of trucks? The answer to that is no. We went back since the last meeting, and as we talked about, we determined what the maximum number of trucks are that we can run, and that is 3 trucks an hour. Actually, it's less than 3, but we rounded up for the analysis to be conservative. This table is the same table as the last one, but we prepared this since our meeting last month because this was a big concern. This is 3 trucks an hour or 6 truck trips an hour. And as you can see, there's very little impact as a result of that because the volumes are so low compared to other developments that you would typically see. So in addition to these 2 intersections, we were asked by the township to analyze another intersection, which we're in the process of collecting data for, and that is the intersection of Kunkletown Road and Silver Spring Boulevard, the T intersection there. So we're collecting that data, and that will be added to our report. The next part of our evaluation was site distance measurements. One of the concerns was let's take a look at what the site distance measurements are today and what they would need to be. So in accordance with PennDOT's criteria, we evaluated what the site distance would be. And what you'll see here, and it is a little difficult to see, we have 3 different colored lines shown. The blue line is the available site distance. The red line is the minimum required stopping site distance based on the speed limit. And then there's this little green line that is the minimum stopping sight distance because there is a 25-mile-an-hour truck speed for any trucks that will be heading south on Chestnut Ridge Drive. And that is a regulatory posting, not a warning sign. So at the intersection of the unnamed township road, there will be a need for some clearing of some overgrowth along here to meet the required sight distance through here. And then looking to the right, obviously there's an intersection. You come to a stop-controlled intersection of Kunkletown Road. It doesn't go through here. So we have sight distance to that intersection.